I grew up in Medina all those years ago. I don't remember much about my origins, never able to move or to search for those who would have first sown the seeds of my existence there. I lay down my roots in the fertile soil of that city and watched as the world passed by. It was a troubled childhood, though I don't like to complain about it. Much bloodshed and pain ran through those stone-walled streets, and though I tried, I couldn't help but soak it up. Echoes of emptiness rang out with every footstep, and gazes more than stole. They pillaged. Mercifully, I was never called upon to be a part of such violence, but it did hurt me to watch it and know that I could do nothing. I wasn't the only one. Many a person, young and old, would come and sit with me, and in the hollowness of their eyes, I detected a longing in their souls, the same longing that surged in me. But since they never spoke to me, they didn't know I shared their grief. For many years this went on. Many, many years. So old were the bloodstains on the sand that many had forgotten it was once golden. And the days became so blackened with misdeeds that night seemed endless. Like this, life crawled on. I grew taller, but alone I stayed, and alone I felt. I'd stand, looking up at the stars, calling on my Maker to guide those around me. They had goodness in their hearts, I could feel it, but they'd been blinded. The moon would gaze back at me, and I knew it too was waiting. Every night I'd stand like this, until one night it grew too hard to bear, this silent suffering. The body that had lain at my feet that afternoon had finally been carried away, but the heaviness remained. I cried out in the dead of night, a cry so deep I felt the whole world might hear it. A breeze rippled across the desert, and my sobbing stopped. Something had whispered to me, a word I hadn't heard spoken in this city before. Its soft sounds both startled and soothed me. The air had changed, and looking up at the moon, I could have sworn it was glowing brighter. The next morning, though the world went about its business, I knew things were different. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. That word, that promise, that prophecy, I believed in it, and I knew my calls to my Maker had not gone unheard. 50 years I waited, nourished by that whisper. My skin had browned and my back had stiffened somewhat, but I still stood as tall as ever. There was an excitement growing in the city. Like birds at dawn, a chorus of anticipation grew. Of course, no one shared any news with me, but I could tell something was happening, something new. It seemed to have lit the faces of my fellow Medinans with a new vigor, filled the hollows of their eyes with pools of a crystal joy that caught the sunlight and twinkled. What had happened? Whispers became shouts, people came and went, and gradually new faces arrived, tired faces, worn and wearied on the surface, but from within, an energy I'd never seen in the faces of humans before. I longed to find out who they were, to talk to them, but they had no time for me, so I was forced to wait and to ask my Maker to let me be a part of the tingling that now coursed through the sands. Footsteps. They shook the earth. Mixing with the sound of drums, it seemed the heavens themselves had come alive with celebration. People were running, running, joining those footsteps that came from just beyond the horizon in a beat that my pulse fell in time to. Singing soft notes, children's voices mixed with the birds who circled above, and the insects, who at times had been my only companions, chirped with a melody I'd never before heard. That day Medina wept with a joy so profuse it washed away all enmity and sorrow, all grief and grudges. The prophecy, that whispered promise, had come in the form of a man so beautiful, I forgot about the moon. And despite the stiffness in my back, as he passed, I bowed. Had I been able to, I would have run after him. I would have called his name, taken his hand, and never let go. This man, 50 years old, was the promise, the prophecy, and his very being exuded that whispered word, peace. Not a day went by when I didn't ache for a glimpse of that face, the sound of his footsteps, his scent as he passed by. Only those who have longed so deeply for something that it brings tears to their eyes to recall it, and a pain inside to know that you cannot reach out and take it, will know the almost paralyzing ecstasy that is felt when you find yourself face to face with the object of your yearning. Such was the feeling that blessed day when, from the newly built structure to my right, I saw this beautiful being approaching. Had I had any sense about me, I would have sung for him, offered him what little I had, bowed for him. But all I could do was stand, mesmerized, with a heart about to explode. Slowly, as if in a dream, he walked up to me, and with a smile that seemed to encompass all around him, he stood next to me and leaned his side gently on mine. A ripple passed through my body, filling something that for all those years had been empty, calling. Those few hours I passed in utter silence, a silence brimming with words I'd longed to utter, words after so many years of loneliness, so many years of pain, so many years of bleeding tears which no one saw, words I knew were finally heard. It was only when this man stood straight again, and his side separated from mine, that I was stirred from this trance, and a panic arose inside of me. "Don't go," I pleaded. "Don't leave me." I felt the tears once again start to flow. But through the glaze of sorrow, his dark eyes turned towards me, and I knew he wasn't really leaving. I passed every waking hour longing for those moments. Nights were simply interludes, a chance to pray for reunion. And sure enough, it would come. The warmth of his back, leaning against me, put sunlight to shame. At his voice, the birds seemed to shy from their singing, and the sand seemed to move in his path, each grain desperate to pass beneath him or sit in his shadow. 8 glorious years I lived on these moments, returning each day this blessed man, having greeted those who gathered to listen to the soothing waves of his voice that transmitted the waters of truth to the shores of the world around him. He would greet me with a smile, place his back against my side, and I would once again be at peace. I watched for 8 years as the city around me not only blossomed, but bore fruit. I watched as handshakes and embraces multiplied till a shimmering web of connection was spun across the city. And I watched as amongst the hairs of my beloved's head, there too appeared silken threads of silver. 8 glorious years. I should have known it could not last. Perhaps I had become complacent. Perhaps I'd had my fair share. I had waited that morning with bated breath, craning to see over the walls of the city, eagerly awaiting his arrival. My heart beat harder as I heard him approach. My greetings to him ran through every vein. I closed my eyes, expecting the leaning embrace. But it didn't come. He had walked on. A strange structure had been placed a few yards away, and he was sitting atop of it. At that moment, something inside me broke. I don't know what it was, but I felt it shatter. And from within it, a flood of pain engulfed me. I sank inside. I tried to stop myself, I really did, but the agony was so intense it broke forth. A long, low moan, wet with tears, tinged with anguish. A long, low moan, one I felt the whole world might hear. But through the tears, I heard movement, and I raised my gaze. To my surprise, from across that distance that seemed like oceans, it met with his. Slowly he stood, and descending from this structure he came towards me. In a trance, choked with longing, I watched as he stretched forth his hand and slowly, gently placed it against my side. The moaning stopped. All that was broken was healed. All that hurt was soothed, and a warmth filled me once again. I never left you, his fingers seemed to say. I never will. Though the structure now supported his blessed frame, it never did leave me, the touch of those fingers, the life they poured into me, the understanding they assured me with. But I never recovered. I had lived a long life, even for a palm tree. But just as the fruit I used to bear shriveled when removed from its stems, so too that day, when his blessed touch from my boughs was finally removed, the rest of me withered. I knew he loved me still, and that so many others needed his touch. But for me, the separation was too much to bear. I was buried not long after. It was his wish, his gift to me, a resting place in the earth upon which he walked. I wish with an intense ache that I had had the chance to say goodbye, to call out his name before the blanket of earth was pulled over my form. But I could not. So there I lay listening for his steps day after day, night after night, longing still, but calmed by the rhythm his presence sent pulsating through the sands. But the footsteps of that man do not ring out like they used to in Medina. Not since the day the city wept once more. I wept too. Tears of a new separation. Deep in the ground I now called home. I know he heard me, but this time he couldn't come. My spirit still cries, longing for that touch, that understanding gaze. And though I will always live in Medina, and my heart stands beside him still, the pain at never having been able to utter to him my love, my thanks, my farewell greeting burns in me still. But I have no lips, no tongue to speak such phrases, no God-given ability to sing his praises. So I ask you, please fulfill the dying wish of an old palm tree and send salams on my beloved for me.